A main topic when discussing the philosophy of God is the problem of evil. It is a pretty simple idea that God needs to have three characteristics simultaneously in order to be considered perfect. First, needing to be omnibenevolent, or all-loving. Second, omnipotent, or all-powerful. And lastly, omniscient, or all-knowing. So the question is, if God can get rid of evil and knows how to do it, but chooses not to, does that mean God is not all good? Evil existing is thus a contradiction for a perfect God, so God must either have only two of these attributes, or just simply does not exist. Many religious and philosophical scholars throughout time have pointed to this issue, specifically noticing all the suffering in the world and suggesting that God clearly cannot be all good. Here are a few clips of this point being made crystal clear, the first being from prominent astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson, and the second being from prominent religious skeptic Sam Harris.
If your concept of a creator is someone who's all powerful and all good, that's not an uncommon pairing of powers that you might ascribe to a creator. All powerful and all good. And I look at disasters that afflict Earth and life on Earth. Volcanoes, hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, disease, pestilence, congenital birth defects. You look at this list of ways that life is made miserable on Earth by natural causes. And I just ask, how do you deal with that? So philosophers rose up and said, if there is a God, God is either not all powerful or not all good.
9 million children die every year before they reach the age of 5. Picture an Asian tsunami of the sort we saw in 2004 that killed 250,000 people. One of those every 10 days, killing children only under 5. It's 24,000 children a day, 1,000 an hour, 17 or so a minute. That means before I can get to the end of this sentence, some few children, very likely, will have died in terror and agony. Think of the parents of these children. Think of the fact that most of these men and women believe in God and are praying at this moment for their children to be spared. And their prayers will not be answered. Any God who would allow children by the millions to suffer and die in this way, and their parents to grieve in this way, either can do nothing to help them or doesn't care to. He is therefore either impotent or evil.
A pretty glim picture. Millions of children suffering horrible deaths, and God doesn't do anything about it. I'm going to try and make what seems like the hard case to make, in that hypothetically a perfect God can exist and also allow these miseries to take place. I'm just going to illustrate this very simply. Like economist Thomas Sowell would say, compared to what? This is Yao Ming, a 7'6" former basketball player. He is not tall. He is tall compared to somebody else. Next to him is 7'1" former basketball player Shaquille O'Neal. He is also not tall, only compared to somebody else. So in this scenario, Shaquille O'Neal is actually short compared to Yao Ming. Lastly is 6'0" former basketball player Allen Iverson. The same logic applies. Allen Iverson is short compared to Shaquille O'Neal, and Shaquille O'Neal is short compared to Yao Ming. When we as a society call Allen Iverson about average height, Shaquille O'Neal enormously tall, and Yao Ming otherworldly tall, it is in comparison to the average man. So pretend there were no natural disasters. No more earthquakes, tsunamis, or anything like that. We would have never known what those even were, and we would have only experienced perfect weather everywhere around the planet. So that step's done, but now we still have disease to worry about. So now let's pretend that everyone has superpowers. Every single person never gets sick and lives their entire life in perfect health. Well, this scenario is super far-fetched and might even be hard to imagine that amazing of a world. But if we only knew of that one, and this one wouldn't be in our consciousness, we would have a new biggest problem. The childbirth defect might be not being able to fly, and the natural disaster might be the baseball game was rained out. That might be the worst thing in the world, if that actually was the worst thing in the world. Here I basically have that a finite amount of time compared to an infinite amount of time is considered to be nothing. So if an everlasting afterlife of happiness does exist, then the finite amount of suffering in this world would be considered completely insignificant by comparison.
And worse than that, most of these people, many of these people certainly, will be going to hell because they're praying to the wrong God. Just think about that. Through no fault of their own, they were born into the wrong culture where they got the wrong theology and they missed the revelation. No matter how good these people are, they are doomed, tortured in hell for eternity. Now, is there the slightest evidence for this? No.
You definitely got me there. Using my same logic as before of finite suffering and everlasting happiness, applied in the other direction to a finite amount of transgressions to an infinite amount of suffering, would not only be considered not all good to me, but evil. If someone killed every last living thing on Earth, that would be still considered nothing on the evil scale compared to the eternal suffering of just that one guilty person. Then further expanding that fate to someone like a loving and caring Native American in the year 1000 that has never even heard of Jesus, yes, that would be considered an evil God to me. So I want to give a metaphorical example the other way around to illustrate my point. There is an offer on the table that you can either choose to take or not. It's completely up to you. You will be brutally tortured, which millions of people were throughout history. That sharp thing will basically rape you. Ropes will be attached to your limbs to rip them off. And just for fun, let's just say we'll light you on fire. This is the worst world we can live in. Think of it as hell. 1 minute of that. The worst and longest minute of your life. Then, for the rest of your life, you will be magically healed and have a lifetime of happiness and anything you wish. Think of that as heaven. Would you take the deal? And even though a being was letting you get tortured, would they still be considered good and all-loving? You might not agree with everything I said in this video, but it will for sure give you something to think about. Hell is bad.
Well, no shit.
Only compared to heaven, and heaven is only good compared to hell. Introduce a finite bad counterexample for an infinite good existence. Basically, my whole argument of how a perfect God could possibly allow evil can be summed up in just one word. Appreciation. I would actually go a step further and say a perfect God needs to do this. An all-loving God wants to maximize happiness. An all-intelligent God knows that a comparison with evil and suffering must exist. And an all-powerful God creates that universe. Let me know what you think in the comments, but as for me, I, as sure as hell, would take that deal.
No deal, Howie!
It's $750,000.
But it ain't $1 million, though.
No, you could buy.
It ain't $1 million, though, man.
No, it isn't.
But it's
It's
not
almost
$1 million.
$1 million.
It's not $1
All right,
million,
agreed.
though.
I said that
That's what
before.
you said. No deal.
All right.
Fine, Nebraska.
Oh! Ow! I'm sorry, boys. It's $400. You didn't win.
We didn't win nothing?
No, you won $400. That's all the time we have on Deal or No Deal. Join us next time before the premise of this show is exhausted and we are canceled.